Thank you. So thank you everybody for coming this morning to this talk with the ISACS Network called Context, Site and Mode, Mapping Outside Arts. This is a research project that has been led by Henrik Gard and supported by the Arts Council of Ireland. So we're absolutely delighted to have Henrik, who is an ISACS member and one of the members of the board of directors as well, delivering his research that he's been working on for the last little bit. And so, as I say, if you have anything you want to add or comments or thoughts as you're going along, just pop your comments in the chat and we will do Q&A. And the first half will be recorded and the second half will not be. So thank you, and over to you, Henrik.
All right. Hello, everyone. So cool to see so many people here. I was quite surprised when I saw such a big list of people who were interested in this. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and get right into it. So, does that work? I hear no words about it doesn't work.
Yes,
so, okay.
That works.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this project is called Context, Site and Mode, Mapping Outside Arts. And it's a thing I've been kind of working on a little bit in the background for quite some time. The project started during lockdown, when I, like others, had a lot of time to sit and think a lot about kind of what I was doing with performance and performing outdoors and circus and things like that. And kind of my first starting points was kind of like how I found that a lot of times when I went out performing, I kind of ended up just being put in some place that maybe didn't always reflect the show the way I kind of thought about it. So, you know, for example, if you were doing this kind of slower and a little bit emotional show, but you'd be put in front of a screaming advertisement urging you to buy a new car or something like that, it can appear a little bit kind of contradictory. Not that this happens very often, but you know, that kind of it's a practical thing, obviously, but I was thinking about this, how much the backdrop affects the show. So I was fortunate to receive an Agility Award from the Art Council of Ireland. And with this support, I was doing dialogues with a couple of artists to talk about things like that. So we were just doing Zoom dialogues. And these artists were Dara McLaughlin, Brian O'Connell, Gary Sochat, Con Horgan, Emily Eben, and Sam Goodburn. And these dialogues were kind of the start initiation for these ideas and this whole project. So what I did with these things, I started writing on a paper just to kind of get all these ideas out of my head and down in details. And that paper's taken me ages to do, and it's now in its final editing phase. It's not out yet, but maybe in a few weeks. And this presentation I'm doing here is kind of a condensed version of the ideas in that paper. So I wanted to focus on performances that happened outside of purpose-built buildings and places. And I was looking at the more common terms, like in Ireland, street arts, in UK, outdoor arts is used more, I think. And I didn't really found that they grouped these performances together. Street arts is, in my ears anyway, kind of pointing towards it happens on the street. And outdoor arts, I think, doesn't include the performances that take place in other buildings like warehouses, old churches, laundrettes, and all these places that really interesting performances are happening. So I call it outside arts, just outside of the purpose-built buildings and places. And I should say as well that this whole presentation and this whole work that I've been doing is mainly from the perspective of circus with a little bit of theater and dance, and that's mainly just because that's what I do. So first, I want to have a little look at theaters, since they are such a prevalent place of seeing performances in our society. And what I want to look at specifically is the way your mode of perception changes when you enter a theater. It's kind of like your attention tunes into what you're about to experience in the theater. And it's the way that the place creates a certain context that we operate in. And I mean this in the same way that most people will keep their voice down when they enter a library, for example. So what I mean is that the place makes you tune into its purpose. And this is then reinforced by context markers. And with context markers in the theater settings, this would be the seating, stage, lights, curtains, staff, announcement, and all these things are markers that continuously remind the audience what context they're in. And besides this, usually in theaters, the people who go there has usually had some communications about what they're about to see. For example, a poster or an ad or something, reading in a festive brochure about the play or show they're about to see. And all this communication before the performance, I call in this paper context creating mediator. So it's just any kind of communication that happens before the performance starts that is setting up expectations and excitement for the performance ahead of its happening. So in this example with the theater, the audience has most of the time already made the decision to invest attention into this event, into the performance. And then the audience is being continuously tuned in by the context markers and the place and tune in to what they're about to see. So outside of these purpose-built buildings, places, and spaces, this context that this is a performance and you're there to watch it, this still has to be created. So this is for the audience to actually make the decision to invest in attention and fully commit to watching the performance. And this is what I call context creation. And I can see at least three important factors, three different ways this context can be created. So the first one, the performance itself, and this is best shown with just the kind of classical busking situations. And I don't know how many buskers we have in the audience here now today, but every busker that started out pretty quickly realized that it wasn't just enough to go with your best tricks out on the street and start doing them. It turns out very hard to get a big, nice, thick audience that way. People will stand and watch, maybe give you a few coins here and there, but if you want to create that big, thick wall of people, you need to do a couple of tricks. And there's lots of techniques about this, and I'm not going to really go into that at all, but it's a way that the performance itself, the performer itself, creates the context for what's about to happen. And often that can, a common one seems to be kind of building up towards this big trick that's going to happen and setting expectations for this big finale that everyone wants to see. The second thing is the place itself. And with this, I mean, for example, if a place has a repetition of being somewhere where shows are being put on, like a famous busking spot, for example, like Covent Garden in London or something like that, people might go there with the intention of there might be some shows on, so they will be tuned in by having seen shows there before. Another thing for the place itself would be unusual places. So with that, I mean, for example, imagine rigging some aerial equipment from a high bridge or something like that. It's such a weird, strange thing to see that, and it looks kind of dangerous, I suppose. So people are quite likely to invest attention in what's about to happen, even when the aerialist is not even up on the aerial equipment. And I think wall running will be another good example of that. You can see if you watch a wall running show setting up, and it's pretty much just the aerialist starts climbing out on the wall, and you already have people stopping watching because it's something so unusual, the place used in any way like that. You don't often see people running and dancing on walls. Another thing for the place itself would be context clashes. So with this, I mean a place that already has a strong context. Something like, take like an airport runway or a cemetery or something like this. These are places where you don't see things happen because they are clearly for specific things already. So the third one that I mentioned already with the context creating mediator, so a festival, event, word of mouth, anything like that, any communication before works as a context creator to build up expectations and help tune in the potential audience for what about to happen. So it works as a mediator between the artist and the audience. And I should say as well, with these factors for context creation, I'm just going to go back here. They are presented here kind of in an isolated fashion, and that's kind of ridiculous in a way, because obviously these things work intertwined and between each other and all that. But for this exploration into outside arts, we can just pretend that they can be isolated like this, and we just can see where that takes us. Okay, so site and performance boundaries. If we look again at the theater where we just were, we can see that the performance boundaries are clear, simple, and strong. And I mean with this that the curtains and the edge of the stage where the performance is happening is where the performance happens. And we kind of usually accept anything to happen within this performance frame. We take something like the classic magicians and then sawing the person in half. You don't really see anyone in the audience calling the police. And hopefully the magician has established trust enough to no one actually thinks that this happens in real life. But it's on stage, it's within the performance phrase, it's not really real, and we accept it, we take it in, we enjoy it. So in outside arts, these boundaries are a bit more blurred automatically. So outdoors, for example, the boundaries of the performance might be marked by a rope or something like this, or maybe the beginning of the audience is marking where the performance frame ends. But usually we don't have these definite markers that is reinforcing the context of the performance taking place. So it's a little bit easier to blur these things. And this can both create complications, but I think more so it can create possibilities to create a bit of magic where the audience is unsure of what is part of the performance or not. And expanding the performance boundaries to include a site also creates the effect of the performance being very apt for the site, the natural connection that situates the performance in the real world. And I just thought of an example here. Last summer, I was watching some friends perform a show at a festival, and at some point during the performance, my friend, he ran into this big building that was sort of behind the place they were performing, and this was the kind of show that was kind of happening there. It was 6 by 5 meters, something like this, and the performance was happening there clearly. But in this moment, my friend runs into the building, and I get very intrigued because wow, what's going on now? He's going into the building, and 10-20 seconds later he runs out with a prop, like he's forgotten it in there. And I was very I thought this was nice, because suddenly the whole building for me was part of the performance. And after the performance, I talked to him, and I was about to say, wow, I really liked when you just went in, disappeared into the building, and came out with this prop in your hand. But he got there before me, and he said, oh crap, I forgot my prop and I had to run in to get it. But for me, that was kind of a very nice moment for me in the show, because suddenly the show wasn't just taking place in that little spot. And I've talked here about kind of just the site, but when I talk about site, I also mean the kind of historical and social context, which can also be included in this performance frame. So the site is always there as a potential that can be used or not. And I'm going to look a bit further on the use of site or not. Oh, look, there's the frame getting all crazy, and you don't really know what's the real reality and the performance. Okay, so I made a scale just to kind of make clear how a show can be using the site or not. So starting from the left there with the site indifferent, this is basically a show that doesn't use the site at all, as in during the creation of the performance, be that in improvisation or before, whatever. There's no active thought on what is the site going to look like, how will I integrate this in any way in the performance. So this mainly the performances I think that you find here is kind of walkabout acts and things like that. So take a walkabout act, walkabout juggling. Just me going around juggling 3 clubs, having a bit of fun with the audience, making some cool tricks, moving on. So I can go wherever with this. I can go on the street, I can go in the forest, I can go, I don't need any kind of like specific ground or anything like this. But this, it's not going to connect with any kind of historical context or anything like this. It's just a bit of fun thing that happens that can roam about. If we move further on to the side canvas, this is what I call the most classic, if you look at something like 5 by 5 meters or something like that, flat ground. So majority of kind of street shows would end up here, where you kind of ask for a square of a certain size that maybe doesn't have too much slope. So you can find this in lots and lots and lots of places, squares and parks and streets and all this. And it's not really using the site. It's just wants a canvas, kind of a flat canvas to do something on. Next one, site adaptive. So this is where something is being used as a major part of the show. For example, a common object that's around, a common thing that can be found in many places, or scene or cultural context that can be found in many places. An example may be, say, if someone has seen a few years ago Lucy Smokes doing the Behind the Dark show, Phoenix Park, Dublin Fringe Festival. So they're rigging aerial equipment from trees and setting up counterweight systems and things like that. The audience get led into this forest and watches this performance that happens, and there's performers flying up and down the trees and like that. So they use trees. Trees can be found in many places, but I would imagine it's not any trees, because obviously the trees has to be strong enough. Maybe they have been looking for a kind of clearing where the audience can stand and watch this and things. So the show adapts to the site, but it is adaptable. And then to the right, site absolutes, basically as far as you can go, a show that cannot be moved at all. It's so strongly connected and integrated in the site that if you were to move it, you might as well make a new show. So that's the kind of extreme of it. And then I have site specific on it. Here's a kind of umbrella term because it's so widely used, this site specific, and I've heard all kinds of definitions of it. So I've kind of put it just as a show that uses the site in a strong way, but perhaps can be moved, but it uses the site very strongly. And I think you should really feel that the show is part of the site if it should be called site specific. Right, okay, so that's the site. The next thing I want to talk about, this I call mode of performance. And what I mean with this is basically how explicit or implicit the content is being presented. So how narrated and clear the performance follows a recognizable pattern or not. And in the paper I've been writing, I call this different levels of subjective participation. And I mean with that a imaginative participation is needed from each one of the audience members to fill in the gaps intentionally left by the artist. And I'll give a few examples of different levels of subjective participation. So I made a scale again. So this is ranging from presentational, experiential to experimental. And I'll give some characteristics here. This becomes a little bit more blurry to kind of define clearly, but I'm going to make an attempt here. So the presentational kind of classic busking style, often I think in traditional circus, is a kind of clear narration, clear designed applause moments. You can see the shared reaction in the audience. I mean, sometimes the audience would even be told when to react and how, and that would be part of the performance. So for example, if I were to create an act, I go out on stage and say, do you want to see me juggle 5 apples? And I'm going to eat all the apples. And then I'm going to do back tuck and I'm going to land like a superhero. And you're going to go, yay. And the audience go, yeah, we want to see that. And then I do it. I eat the apples, do the back tuck, I land like a superhero. And the audience goes, yay, it happened. Amazing. So I'm not leaving much gaps there to the imagination. I'm kind of telling what I'm going to do. I'm doing it. So this is the extreme of the presentation. In the experiential, more gaps for the audience is left for them to fill in. So the experience of shows would then differ more from person to person. So there'd be less moment for applause, perhaps less clear acts, and the music might work as a kind of amplifying the performance rather than making beginnings and ends. I find that the experiential usually reaches a larger range of emotions and often does require more tuning in for you not to just kind of dismiss it completely. So a higher attention investment is needed to tune into this type of show. It'd be more sensitive to distractions, which can be a problem on the street, obviously. So this is where a choice and use of sight can come in really handy. And then we have the experimental, very high subjective participation. So loads of gaps, you don't really know what's going on. You kind of had to fill it in yourself, a lot of it. And the reactions and opinions would differ greatly between audience members. So people can have a complete different experience of if they like it, if they don't like it. There might be a completely unrecognizable structure. And any attempt to make the implicit explicit kind of destroys the essence of the experimental work. This is really, can be really go anywhere into crazy stuff, and it's really for exploring novel niches and unfamiliar emotions. So I first started with making a very categorical list of these certain things, and then it kind of felt like this is not such a rigid thing. So I made this to kind of just give an idea of the characteristics of these different modes. And so this is more kind of where the categories emerge from loosely associated concepts. So I'm just going to leave that for a little bit, and I'm going to have a drink of water. So I'm not going to go into detail any of these things because it would take a little bit too much time, but I want to show you what I did with these two scales. So I put them together and I made what can be called a 4-quadrant map. So here we have the sight scale and the mode scale, and we can look at these two things simultaneously to see if any interesting things appear. So what I did with this, I developed this kind of framework, and I started kind of looking at shows from this framework. And I started, once I was away and seeing shows and things like this, I just kind of made a note of where I thought that the performance I just seen ended up on this map. And I put this together, and it looked something like this. And I should say now that this is not like in any way a fair representation of shows. Really, it's just kind of where I've ended up going and working and stuff like that. So it's not like I've gone to 50 festivals and just looked at all the shows and marked them. It's kind of just what I've happened to want to go and see myself and so on. So there's not much dance on here. There's just a few things because I just haven't seen much dance in the last year and a half. But we can look at it and see what kind of comes out of it. So I don't know if you can see my cursor. I hope so. So here in this, and this is mainly walkabouts that has ended up here, and I find that most of the time they tend to be quite presentational and wouldn't use the site very much to kind of roam around. And this would be kind of a lot of the classic busking shows and classic street shows would kind of end up here. And then we see some shows go under the experiential here and down to the experimental, a couple of site-specific shows. And see, I haven't put any, there's no names of what these shows are and like that. It doesn't really matter. It's not really the point. The point, I think, is just to have a rough idea of different types of shows and where they would end up on this. So what can this little map be used for? I see a couple of different uses. I see, for example, maybe for me the most interesting is sort of to, as an artist, see where is your default place on this map. Where do you end up making most of your shows and things like that? And what you can then do is just pick another spot on this map that you find interesting. There's, I mean, very unexplored areas up here and here and here. And you can just pick that and start from this map and start doing a show or maybe just an exercise or something, starting from this map to kind of push yourself in an artistic developmental way, I suppose. And as well, I should mention as well with this whole map, because it gets a little bit weird, like there's no, I put no value judgment whatsoever into this. All of these places is like filling different functions and different events, audiences, moments. So it's really nothing about that. And it's a reason why you find most of the things up here, because this is the side canvas is like the shows that can really travel easily. And the presentation might be a little bit more digestible for larger audiences, and it doesn't require so much context creation or attention investment. It's more it can take distractions in a different way than shows down here would do. So it makes a lot of sense, and it's also a resource thing, obviously. But I personally, I would like to see more artists exploring some of these a bit unexplored areas. So, and we can maybe see as well as Circus, for example, has been funded for a while now in Ireland, and maybe we see with more funding coming in and so on that more artists will venture into these other areas. Okay, so I have one more thing to show you. So this here is to attempt to put what I've talked about with context, site, and mode into larger context in the kind of creation process of a show. So I'm going to just walk you through my thinking here, because it's a lot of stuff on this picture. So we start here by the creator. So this is the artist or director or whatever, whoever is creating a performance. Creator gets ideas from somewhere. I've just put some things down here, different desires and goals, and wanting to express this, or knowledge of the audience is going to be presented to, whatever, loads of things down here that create some sort of desired effect. Sort of, what do you want to create and how do you want that to affect people? Then as the show actually is being performed, puts into the performance frame here, the show is being performed through the mode of performance and is taken in through the subjective filter of the audience. It's presented on the site in a larger context, and this somehow yields lots of feelings, opinions, experiences, thoughts, afterthoughts, reactions, reflections, etc. You get it. And this can be summarized in some sort of actual effect of the audience. And the question now is, does the desired effect match the actual effects, or does it have to? Do you care at all? Maybe that's not the point. And this might seem very abstract, and it is, but we can take an example, like, for example, in real time, if I'm creating a show and I have this moment when I'm going to slip on a banana peel, I'm going to follow my arts, it's going to be really funny. I want the whole audience to just laugh out loud at this moment. That's my desired effect. I put this in here, I do it, I slip on a banana peel, and I get a roaring laughter from the audience. So there was a great match between the desired effect and the actual effect. So it can be quite simple like that as well. And I don't mean with this is quite a blunt and weird way of looking at a creation process, a very reductive way. But maybe what I'm trying to do with this is just to give a rough sketch of an overview of a creation process, and just kind of show a little bit the complexity as well of when you put the thing out, especially in kind of the outside arts. There's so much context and site and things that really is very unpredictable. So that's a little bit my point for this, just to show the complexity of it all. And this, if we go back to the modes, this makes more sense, especially this desired effect and actual effect match makes way more sense in the presentational mode. As you move down to the experiential and experimental, this becomes very, very difficult to predict, and I think it should be. So okay, just a little conclusion. So I just want to say that this intention of this whole project was not to map all these shows and, you know, put them as a little dot on these abstract maps just for the sake of doing it, and, you know, pretending that it's some sort of full understanding of it whatsoever. But it's more has been for me to speculate and explore and expand my thinking around what outside arts is and can be, and create some tools that can be used creatively as a starting point to make a show, a framework for artistic development, or as a calibration tool for hosting a festival or event. So it's been a fruitful process for me doing this work. I've both enjoyed it and learned a lot, and I can just hope that you got something from it today. So thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation. I have one more thing to share though, and that is a residency that is a group residency that I'm doing in end of May in the Motion Chapel, County Roscommon, funding by the Art Council. And this is just a couple of days, 3 days we're going to spend with a small group, and we're just going to explore different ways of creating work based on some of these ideas and other ideas. And it won't be about like creating, like you won't come out of there with a new outdoor performance really like that. That's not the point, but more explore different ways of making work and just have a bit of fun failing and trying again, and just doing all kinds of explorations in creating for outdoors and unusual spaces. So that's me there. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and we can do yeah, I'm open to any kind of reflections, questions, any kind of, if you think this is bullshit, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. So anything.
Well, thank you so much, Henrik. That was absolutely fascinating, and it's super to hear that kind of detail of thought process percolating. And I know you've been working on those concepts and trying to figure out how to make it into a